So we're reconvening at 12:50. And why don't we, because we know some other folks are coming for public participation, but we have a few that we can start with in a moment. But why don't we introduce our new team members first that are here, and we'll welcome them on board.
Great. Thanks, Mike. We have two new members since our last board meeting in Administrative and School Support Services. So I'd like to turn it over to Anthony Soleil first to introduce himself and tell him what his role is here in the department.
My name is Anthony Soleil, and they just, like he said, they just hired me in the school nutrition department. And so my role is a school district consultant. So I go around to the various school districts to ensure that they're abiding by the rules and the regulations that are prescribed to us. And I've been here for a month. So far, I've been out in the field 5 or 6 times, and so it's a learning process, but I'm grasping a hold to it, and I enjoy the position.
Great.
And then Molly Emerson.
My name is Molly Emerson. I was hired at the same time as Anthony. I am the school consultant for the food distribution unit in the Office of School Support Services. I replaced Tom Priest, who now moved over to the school side, in charge of the commodity supplemental food program, as well as the emergency food assistance program. And then I'm also backing up J.D. Melner, who's on the school side. I've already been to the UP last week and headed to the UP again on Monday to do reviews. So, thank you.
Great.
And finally, for this month, I have the pleasure of introducing you to Tracy Teasley, who is new to the Office of Education Improvement and Innovation on our financial independence team. So, Tracy, you want to share a little bit about what you've been up to?
Oh, sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I am the newest member, as Linda said, of the Financial Independence Team, and I get the distinct pleasure of working with the districts who are facing financial deficits to make sure that they don't have an educational deficit. So I get to help them use their resources creatively. Since I've been here about 5.5-ish weeks, I've been out doing school improvement grant fiscal compliance reviews, and I am now the resident expert on procurement services in the state of Michigan. So if you have any questions, just give me a call. So it's been a pleasure being here. It's been great. Everyone's been so warm. I think I've seen the state superintendent at least twice a week. He's like my elevator buddy.
Yeah,
now, so
we
it's
are.
been great being here.
Thank you. I'm not stalking you. That is totally by coincidence.
I'm totally not taking it that way.
No, and on a serious note, it's really nice to run in a lot of folks in the department. You're just your bright smile, your positive attitude. I mean, it really is infectious, and I've noticed that a number of times already. Okay, let's see, we did minutes. That was exciting. John, thank you. It was a good report. Appreciate your comments. They were excellent. Okay, we're going to go right to public participation. We have, I think, pretty much everyone, but we certainly have some that we're going to start
Another
anyway.
group is now here.
Okay, so,
They're filling out their papers.
and Mertz already has a few, so we're going to go
Okay.
right to those.
So let me remind you that people are given 5 minutes for public participation. And if you'll come to the end of the table, if you have any handouts, just pass them to the closest person and they'll be happy to pass them around the table. And the board does not engage in conversation here at the board table, but they're happy to hear whatever it is you've come to tell them. Our first speaker is Rogelio Landine, and he will be followed by Suzanne Hewitt.
Esteemed members of the board, esteemed Superintendent Mike Flanagan, congratulations on a stellar career in your leadership. Just wanted to be here to say thank you. I give you my full appreciation and regard for all the work that you've done, particularly as we've evolved our relationship in terms of trying to do better for the children in Michigan.
Thank you.
Your courage, your profound, steadfast commitment here to Michigan. Because of you, I had an opportunity to participate on the Achievement Gap Critical Friends Work Group. And while that document never reached public disclosure, I hope internally it's serving to help guide policies and directions that the department is taking. It was through you, it was possible to meet with Dr. Kiesler and discuss things in her department, in her purview. And along with Lupe, President Austin, and this board, it was possible for me to bring a solution for resource equity at the February 10th board meeting. I wanted to update you a little bit on the results of that, and as a result, what has transpired since is that presentation led to a presentation to the National Council on Educating Black Children on resource equity that allowed me to take the same concept and principle and scale it nationally for urban districts. Proposals are now requested by LA Unified, who has $2 billion in debt, with regard to that same formula, and has been submitted to Chicago, who is $1 billion in debt, also as a possible solution for their district. So things are happening, and it really lends to the importance of what it is to come before a body like the Michigan State Board of Education, and the kind of influence you can have from here on other districts and education as a whole. And it's important that I think folks like us who experience that need to come back and let you know just how important this body is and this audience is to education, not only in Michigan, but nationally. Which is why that I would encourage the board that as you deliberate to determine which presentations come before the board, that you please continue to support one another when recommendations for presenters are made. I would respectfully suggest that primary criteria be solution-oriented and provide exponential value for our students. Since February, we have seen the 2015 Grad Nation report projecting 90% graduation rates by 2020, with a focus on low-income, minority students, disabled students, and urban districts. While commendable, it must be tempered by the reality of less than 30% of those students being college and career ready. We've seen the report on public school safety and discipline released, making the case for an 11-to-1 return on investment for restorative justice programs in our schools, a worthwhile endeavor and something that we need to do more of and work with. Ed Trust Midwest Michigan Achieves report for 2015 states, if Michigan stays the current course, we could drop into the bottom 10 states by 2030, essentially saying we must change. And it's worth taking a look and a revisit to the Equity Commission report, Each and Every Child, in terms of reminding ourselves of all the work that was done nationally that we still have not fully embraced and looked to as possible areas for solutions. Last month, President Obama and Secretary Duncan both encouraged leaders in regards to equity to exercise the political will and courage to act. I think it's something that we can all take to heart. And finally, I just want to take a moment to welcome our new superintendent, Brian Winston, and look forward to a continuing relationship with the office, with the department, and with this board. God bless, and thank you for this time. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to deviate a little bit. Our next speaker is not in the room right now. So Mike Ennis will be the next speaker.
My name is Mike Ennis from Ferris State University, and I'm representing many of the CTE faculty that prepare CTE instructors, and where our comments in reference to the waiver by the superintendents earlier today. And what I've done is modified some of the comments that we had sent out electronically earlier, but I want to reinstate some of these. We have some issues with the waiver. The number one concern is that the current annual occupational authorization provides an opportunity for a person with recent and relevant work experience to teach in a CTE program. A provision is in place for renewing those annual authorizations for a maximum of 8 years while the candidate actively pursues a post-secondary program towards a bachelor's degree and or an interim occupational certificate, or basically the traditional route. Post-secondary coursework for an IOC contains a minimum of 6 credits of how to teach CTE courses, which is in comparison to 20 for a secondary or elementary teacher. Unfortunately, people during the 8 years that they have develop or potentially develop some ineffective teaching habits in those 8 years without the mentoring that's needed. The waiver is proposing to eliminate the 8-year rule and allow an AOA teacher to continue teaching for the remainder of their career as long as they show evidence of 1 semester hour or 25 state continuing education clock hours or district-provided professional development in content or pedagogical coursework and a small number of additional work experience hours in their field. Michigan CTE educators do not support this aspect of the proposed waiver. As written, there's essentially no motivation for an AOA holder to ever move to an IOC or acquire any post-secondary professional preparation coursework or pre-service experiences that are required by all elementary and secondary teachers. Second concern, the proposed waiver allows an individual with as little as 1 year of related business and industry experience to become a teacher in a CTE classroom. That person may continue teaching without any post-secondary professional preparation coursework or pre-service experiences. They would also be excused from the requirement for passing the PRE, which is required of all Michigan teachers. For example, a person who acquired welding skills on the job could be hired for a welding position at a CTE center or high school with as little as 1 year of practical real-world experience. After hire, the proposed waiver indicates that the new welding teacher would be only required to gain an additional 200 hours of work experience, paid or volunteered each year, and add an additional 25 hours of district-provided professional development. This example illustrates a scenario where a welding teacher is not required to move towards securing any professional preparation courses or pre-service experiences, where pedagogy is learned, practiced, or mastered. As written, the proposed waiver has no stated time limit. It may be renewed without requiring the hiring district to seek a more qualified candidate. We believe that the perpetual nature of the proposed waiver places teachers in the classroom who are not prepared to deliver instruction to the diversity and the complexity of CTE students that we have in our classes. Concern 3, the waiver allows teachers who currently hold a provisional or professional certificate to teach in any CTE area which they have as little as 1,600 hours work experience in the last 6 years. For example, a physical education teacher who has worked in his or her cousin's catering business during the summers can become a culinary arts instructor. There is a difference between the pedagogical preparation between non-CT and CTE certified instructors. CTE instructors who entered the classroom with a wealth of technical knowledge and skills often have little preparation in classroom instruction and need mentoring and professional learning opportunities to fill these gaps. CTE teachers need to possess a unique set of skills to properly prepare their role as an educator. Michigan CTE teacher educators perceive this proposed waiver as a huge step backwards and are concerned with the impact the waiver could have on the integrity and the rigor of CTE instructors, especially in a time when the state is focused on increasing teacher quality. Additionally, there's no historical or empirical evidence that this waiver will do what it's intended to do, but there is a strong correlation between teacher preparation and student achievement. Therefore, due to these concerns as well as the impact this will have on the field of CTE, we sincerely ask that you not approve the waiver as it stands and provide adequate time for a meaningful yet effective modification to be formed. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. This is all timely in terms of John's point about the timeline to try to make a decision in August. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Mary T. Wood. Here she comes.
Back there. No, she was there. She was just hiding. I'm sorry, I turned my form in last, so I thought maybe I'd be last.
You have status here. You've come so many times. We appreciate your input.
But thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Mary T. Wood. I live at 27533 Santa Ana in Warren, Michigan. And to some of the board members, I say hello with my introduction because we haven't formally met. But it's been a long time since I've been here, but I haven't been in retirement. I wanted to update the board as to what's going on and also petition your support. For the past 2 years, I've actually been contracted as a consultant with the board of directors of the EAA. So I finally have been able to get a paying job for my advocacy work. Several years ago, by coming to their board and bringing issues forward, the then chairperson, Carol Goss, realized the importance of the information I was bringing forward and felt that it was imperative that they get it right. And so she valued my work and felt that I needed to be paid for my time. So my contract will be up this August, and I do not know what will happen thereafter. But there are some issues and concerns that as the EAA and the Reform Office is shifting over to a new department, I feel it's my last chance to bring it before this board, at least maybe at this moment. Just want to take some lines out of a press release that Governor Snyder had put out in June of 2011 when the EA was created. And he says it's a new system that drives vastly more resources directly into their classrooms and offers greater autonomy is to help ensure dramatic student achievement increases. And we need that. The system will place the ultimate power for running each school in the hands of the principal, teachers, and staff at the school rather than in the central administration or office far removed from the school. The time is now to establish a permanent solution. I think everybody agrees with that, and they were supportive of the creation of such an endeavor. He goes on to state further in here that the Detroit Public Schools currently spends nearly half of its entire budget on bureaucracy and management, with $900 per student going strictly to pay off the debt. Because the system will operate on a very lean administrative structure and not be required to pay out funds towards debt reduction, it will ultimately seek to push 95% of all school funds into the classroom. Now pay attention to the 95%. Mentions they'll have a challenging curriculum. I want to tell you to this date, there has been no curriculum brought to the EA board for their approval. Nobody is really certain what the curriculum looks like in the schools within the EAA. It seems to be all independently operating in each school building. That's rather scary. This plan, which was developed after extensive research into the most successful efforts to improve low-performing schools around the country, is designed to achieve that goal. Now, we all know that when this was presented, there was already in writing a plan of what this EA system would do. I don't know who did that research. I can tell you now at this point, being up close and personal, that basically the system is starting all over from scratch with the new chancellor. What was under Dr. Covington basically is no more. So we have 3 years of academic schooling of money invested to close to $100 million per year, with a turnover of teachers pretty much at the 50% rate per year, of all that training and establishment put into the system, that money that was spent that has no really effect on building a foundation. It's starting all over. I come to this board right now acknowledging that you do have constitutional authority over oversight of all public education. With the system being transferred, the Reform District being transferred to the Department of Technology, Management, and Budget, the description for that is it promotes a unified approach to information technology management and provides centralized administration of services including auditing, budgeting, employee resources, financial services, fleet management, mail, printing, property management, purchasing, records management, and retirement services for department and agencies in the executive branch of the state government. Now, I know that you all here know this. You know, I'm really putting this out to those in the general public listening, that this is something to be really concerned about. And I don't know what will go forward, but what I am suggesting is that this board petition to have a commission created, very much what the Detroit Education Council had done in the 3-month period that they had, to really take a look at the research of what's going on in New Orleans now since 2011, what's going on in Memphis, Tennessee now, how many years later, what happened to those miracles, and really come up with a plan of what school reform should look like on what we know at this day to be best practices. Because I'm concerned that 2 or 3 years down the road, we're going to be in this very same place that we are today. So I give that to you as your responsibility of public oversight over these schools that may no longer be in control in this department. But you can be proactive in making a significant change down the road. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Suzanne Hewitt.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Hewitt. I am on the committee to honor Cesare Chavez in Grand Rapids. I would like to say thank you to Superintendent Flanagan, and Eileen is not here, but I would like to thank our board member, Eileen Weiser, as well for coming to our Cinco de Mayo celebration at the Grand Rapids Public Museum on the Grand River. Superintendent Flanagan was honored for helping Michigan kids be powerful because they are educated by following the values of Cesare Chavez. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
I believe I have the last two public participation forms, and it is my understanding that both of these people want to come with some additional people and take advantage of the group participation. So if Naomi Norman and New Doe and their group will approach the table? Am I right about that? You want to do the 10 minutes?
Yes.
Okay.
Real students, we're good.
Yeah. Can we, yeah. Come on in, Mr. Nice. Well,
Please.
thank you.
Sorry we don't have enough seats, but for as many as are there, if you would like to take them, that would be fine. Or you can, I don't know how many you can squeeze at the table, you can pull chairs up from behind you if that's
We're going to
better.
have the students sit down and we're going to stand behind them.
Okay. Whatever works for you works for us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. I'm Naomi Norman. I am here representing Washtenaw Intermediate School District and the Washtenaw Educational Options Consortium. Scott Menzel, our superintendent at WISD, and David Duggar, our director of the Washtenaw Educational Options Consortium, both send their regrets. They couldn't be here today, but they're very delighted that you'll have a chance to hear from these wonderful students and faculty. We're here because we had a visit from several state board members a few weeks ago, and I think they helped us recognize that we had created something special with this program. So we wanted to share that with you. For a little context, about 8 years ago, a group of very innovative Washtenaw County superintendents came together and said we have to improve the quality of high school education in Washtenaw County. And they had a two-pronged strategy. One was to improve the traditional high school, and the other was to create more options that were accessible for all students in the county. So multiple programs grew out of that. One of them was this program that we're going to share with you. And this is Washtenaw International High School
and Middle Academy.
and Middle Academy.
And I can speak on behalf of both programs. My name is New Doe, and I'm the principal of these two exceptional programs that have prepared these exceptional students and host phenomenal faculty. We are a public consortium high school and middle school, serving students from diverse economic, social, racial, ethnic, geographic regions. And we serve students who are coming from Ann Arbor, Chelsea, Lincoln, Manchester, Milan, Saline, Whitmore Lake, Ypsilanti, and surrounding areas within Wayne County as well. 100% of our students are participating in the International Baccalaureate curriculum, which is known for its rigor, relevance, and focus on inquiry-based, student-centered instruction. We just celebrated our inaugural senior class, and they have been accepted to very selective colleges, including University of Michigan, Stanford, Columbia, and Yale. We are here today per encouragement from several board members who came to visit our school to really celebrate our students and to thank you for your ongoing support of innovative programs that serve public school students, such as ours here at Y-High and Weima. So I'll introduce our lead teacher, Mr. Eric Wynn.
Hi, my name is Eric Wynn. I'm the lead teacher at Washington International High School, which is the high school, and then you'll meet Erica here, who's a teacher at the middle school level. I'm just here to say that essentially my favorite thing, or the thing I find most rewarding about working at this school is internal, and it's these students. And particularly because these students are risk takers. Because we draw from all of the different districts throughout the county, these students have to eschew their friend groups, their home high schools, and a lot of familiarity in order to attend our school. And it's that confidence that they get from taking those risks that gives them confidence, buoys their confidences in taking other risks, like raising their hands when they're not called upon, or starting up a club without any kind of prompting from the organization, or anything along those lines. And so really what brings me into that building every day is these risk takers right here. The curriculum itself challenges these guys to become critical thinkers and lifelong learners by merit of the curriculum. The International Baccalaureate actually dictates that the entire creative process, whether it be an essay in history, whether it be a portfolio in art, must start with a question. And it's actually mandated that teachers in the International Baccalaureate organization document that process. And so the documentation begins with documenting student questions and the idea of creating inquiry in the project itself. So when we talk about creating inquiry, we talk about critical thinking, it really is the curriculum that we see through the International Baccalaureate that ensures that that is carried over through lifelong learners.
Hi, I'm Erica Galley McGregor, and I teach at the Washington International Middle Academy, 7th and 8th grade math and science. And I want to talk a little bit about how rewarding and energizing I find it to teach at a school where there's so much collaboration and reflection, and it's valued so much and supported so much. At WIMA and Y-High both, everyone is encouraged to become involved in many different aspects of the school culture and climate. And as teachers, we're given the support to collaborate. We're encouraged to share our diverse strengths and learn from each other. In fact, the entire school community is invited to work and grow together. Parents, community members, and most importantly, students are involved in every aspect of what we do at WIMA. In the classroom, students and teachers are truly a team of learners, respectfully sharing ideas and opinions and reflecting on the learning process. Student voice is at the center of what we do every day. Students' interests and choices are key components of every unit, and students and teachers reflect together to improve learning experiences and foster personal growth. Teachers and administrators work together regularly to improve and enhance teaching and learning and to share best practices. Additionally, community members are welcomed into the collaborative process. And I guess I want to turn it over to them at this point.
So the real
because
stars
it's
of the
really-
show. Will you all introduce yourselves and then talk a little bit about your experiences at Y-High and WIMA?
Yes. Hello, I'm Sharon Sabo, and I'm a junior at Washington International High School.
Hi, I'm Olivia Dotson. I'm a sophomore at Washington International High School.
Hello, I'm Daniel Niamati, and I am also a sophomore at Washington International High School.
Hi, I'm Maria Patton, and I'm an 8th grade student at Washington International Middle Years Academy.
Hello, my name's Logan Kennedy, and I'm a 6th grader at Washington International Middle Academy.
Number 3, you want into number 3?
Yes. Y-High, when I first heard of Y-High, it was fairly new, so there's a great new body of students, new teachers, so it was a really fresh start. And ultimately, when I attended Y-High, and I'm still attending, I was introduced to this new, not only new, amazing student-focused environment, but this amazing academically rigorous program, the IB program, which really helped me not only excel in my academics, but also have personal growth in different departments of academics. And also, the IB program has taught me to become not only a risk taker, a critical thinker, but also being open-minded. And this is actually really, really salient because, especially in our school, we are so culturally diverse, and I see different cultures, different traditions that we really thrive off these differences, and it's a really beautiful thing. And also, something very minor, but something very important to me is the class sizes. We have, in my grade, in the junior class, 68 students, and this means very small class sizes, and this means we have very close relations with our teachers, our professors, and our classmates, and it's a very open environment, and it's challenging, but it's definitely worth it in the end. it's overall a great journey.
Okay, so my journey in Y-High kind of started as I opened the doors of Y-High and walked in and saw how diverse, how culturally diverse everybody was. And it really, I've seen this cultural diversity, but not really acknowledged it, not really appreciated it. And it just took me those couple minutes to get adjust to everybody in the school, to know that this was a place for me to feel comfortable and supported in an environment where I'm challenged every day to take into account everybody's diverse backgrounds. And really, it has made me an open-minded student as I'm able to find a different perspective on the world. And I also am very lucky to have this program to challenge my academic support in terms of it really has challenged me to think deeply and really challenge my analytical skills and just think deeply about everything that I have to encounter, that there's a deeper meaning in every single text that we're given, every question, and we just have to dig deeper beyond the surface to discover this meaning. And I really feel like that will continue to help me in my life as I have an eased kind of support going into college and further. Thank you.
Okay, so the thing that I like most about Y-High is that I'm in an environment in which people are there to learn. And I've been to schools in which people are there just to get through the day, to get to that lunch or whatever that's right when the bell rings. But at Y-High, people are there to learn. Going to every single class, such a diverse environment, so inclusive, and so involved in this kind of partnership that people want to be there. People are there wanting to listen to their teachers. And that to me is quite remarkable, and I don't think I'd have it any other way.
So at YMA, I enjoy it because it's very diverse and it's very project-based. There are a lot of different cultures and really nice teachers with high expectations.
At YMA, I really like how we get to try new things and do things that you usually can't do at other schools. For example, we have this class called Design Technology. This year in Design Technology, we learned about emergency shelters, and we actually got to build them out of cardboard, shower curtains, and other materials that you have in your home.
Wonderful. We wanted to, again, thank you for your support. I know Dr. Z and Lupe specifically, and Eileen, who isn't here, came to visit our school, acknowledged our student work and the devotion and talents of our staff, and we just, again, wanted to express our thank you for supporting such innovative public programs like Washington International High School. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm a proud example of public education in our kids here.
I don't think there are any more public participation forms. Am I correct about that? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so where are we now? Sups report. That's me. Well, this is like the traditional part right here for a few moments. This is just last few times feeling inadequate after I watch our Teacher of the Year do such a great job technologically. I've started to at least show my tweets. It kind of gives a sense of the month, and at the same time, maybe gives the flavor of the work. I've been a little more conscious of this since Brian's been in the interim, or not the interim, but this interim time, to give a sense of the work. Well, we've been there this morning. You saw that. That was a great opportunity, highlight of the month. Yeah, this one really made me think. Human attention span down to 8 seconds. Goldfish, 9 seconds. Along with all other challenges, great job, teachers. Just think about the challenge of that. I know my daughter talks about it. Wanted to thank Vicki. That was a bit of a surprise to me, but we've known each other for over 20 years. We were both new superintendents together in the Supes Institute in 1988. Our first year, she was in Illinois, and I think this was something that, I don't know, that really, if you don't know Joyce Fouts, she's just an amazing person, just carries on the Galileo tradition. A few of us got to found that many years ago. I'd say Bob Maxfield was kind of the visionary behind that, but I was asked to speak at their graduation, and I know Melody was there and others. Yeah, this was silly, I don't know. Forget exactly what we, oh yeah, this was the Red News. Yeah, this was Red, we'll probably just skip over that. Bill Mays came after me at MASA, his retirement opportunity, did a nice job there for those years. Yeah, this is my dad in Europe. I've often told my kids when they were going to college from 17 to 21 that my dad was actually in the war from the time he was 17 years old to 21, and had a chance to he came home briefly for his father's death and had a chance not to go back and went back anyway. I know it's overplayed a bit, the Greatest Generation, but thought of him on Memorial Day, of course. This is our own Louis. That same day I got home, watched TV, and Louis Burgess in our shop here. I thought just for his past and continued service, he retired as a colonel in the Army and has been here. He's a great leader and leads some Memorial Day services here in town. So I highlight that. A friend of mine, we worked together when I was superintendent in Farmington, passed away. Great guy, difficult. And I wrote there that I put off seeing him till after I retire, and so don't put off.
Don't put off.
Phil Stoddard does a great job over there. I think they're in the process of saving the retirement system in many ways, along with, I think, the way the legislature and the governor are. And now field people are praising basically the saving of the retirement system by picking a lot of that up at the state level. That's very helpful. Stan Kuget, a lot of folks retiring all of a sudden. I started something here, and know more about him because you see him in Panic. No, not at all. But he was really quite a leader in the Darkening of the Lines group, which I wanted to recognize. Karen was a part of that for so many years. This is my sister-in-law, and I had a way that I could make it to her classroom. She's a parapro. She went back just kind of for the kids. And the day before, I'd asked her if she would note this. She wears the pedometer. 18,000 steps.
My husband too.
She's got special needs kids, preschool that she works with in a public school setting. And I just don't know how they do it. I don't know how they do it. Graduation this isn't Pam was there. I'll leave it to you later, maybe under comments if you have any. But what a great day. And this young lady as we're looking at her to the right, overcame in her speech, it was a tearjerker, and overcame some real difficulties, and is now going to be at the James Madison School at Michigan State.
Awesome.
It's quite a story. Early Childhood Summit, it's actually Susan was the star there. I just had a chance to make a few comments, but boy, has that come a long way. And I'm not just saying this because it's my last meeting. This board has a lot to do with having set the targets of early childhood, even though the action sometimes is seen in some other areas. I can't thank you enough for that.
No Lion King?
No Lion King. I told John that Chris Wygant was a good one. I was leaving an event, and he said, I'm a little uncomfortable doing this without you there, but you're okay with it, right? And I said, no, I'm okay. And I found out later what it was is he was starting new at MASA. He had left Wayne Risa, and he said, I was going to end my comments today with a video, but I understand the Lion King's been checked out for the last 10 years. So, very good, Chris. It was, actually, I haven't used it for like 8 years, I think, but...
Return it to the library.
Library, Michigan.
Yeah. Right. Where is that? Just a few things. I was asked in some other places, and I just thought I'd mention these, to what might be some lessons I've learned here. I mean, one is, and I'm really looking forward to kind of transitioning from being a human doing to a human being. I think you can get caught up in this work, and it's just It's important, but human being is a different thing, and don't wait till you retire. Be wary of what most people want. As Henry Ford said, if I asked most people, they would have wanted faster horses. Teachers really are the number one force for good in the world. In my article today, I talk about Miss Kubler. You've heard me talk about her, but a key person in my life. Want to do, a lot of the folks who were looking for state soup, and another reason of the many that I think you made a great selection in Brian, is you want to do something, not be something. And I think one person was courageous enough to tell me after we talked about that, he withdrew as an applicant, or I don't know that he ever actually applied, because he realized it was more in his head that he thought he should be something. And this is really coming down to trying to do things that you think are going to help our kids, and I think Brian meets that perfectly, by the way. And then finally, give each of our kids hope first. I mean, they can't even see some of this if we're not willing to help them understand and give them hope that they can get to some of these places. And then even though I know, John, as John said, there's something going on the 25th. I actually don't know that much about it. Eileen was surprised at something today, but so I don't want to say too much, but I thought I don't want to leave after 120 meetings, and first and foremost, certainly thank the board. I mean, this is why I probably should wait till the 25th. I'm going to jump to something I wanted to name in your honor. What I wanted to do was, I thought, what could I do that would say I appreciate your leadership and how you do this without any trappings. You're not getting what a lot of other public officials get, even other elected officials, and you just do it religiously. So one thing I thought I would do is start in your name a state board leadership library, and hope that people will add to it and that people will take. So I'm starting with some of mine. I'm only taking what I have here at work. I'm going to take some from at home also, and probably get something that looks better than that. This was just to try to get it started. And if you notice, by the way, Brian, you're real good at this, but one thing I made sure I had in this library is a Granholm and an Angler biography. Just go with one there. But I thought, even though our work is about children and education, so much of this is transferable as just plain old leadership, and how do you lead change, and how do you lead people to try to do the right thing? And I think you exhibit that regularly and with very little accolades. And I thought if people will help me here in the department and other places add to this, we'll find an appropriate way, and I'd like to name it the State Board of Education Leadership Library. And thank you for those 10 years here. And by the way, the reason I wanted to do this was kind of odd, where suddenly U of M says they'd like to have my papers. And I thought, uh-oh.
Even get the FOIA then?
Right. Yeah. I don't even know what that means exactly, but I panicked for a minute thinking, I'm not sure what it means in a digital age, actually, but we're looking into that. So a little bit of this was trying to find a place to put books in your honor. I really, speaking of not Governor Engler I didn't work with here, but Governor Granholm and Governor Snyder, these are two, if I write a book, I'm kind of planning on writing a book, but Anna keeps thinking as time goes on, maybe you won't. I just think what I see in both of them are very, just like you, they're decent people. They may differ on some issues, but they actually really care about the state and the kids in this state just like you do. I've been in a lot of closed kind of meetings with them, less so with Governor Snyder recently, but not because of him, just because of circumstances and stuff. But, I just want to say I appreciate what they've done in addition to what the board has done. I think they have moved the state in ways that they don't get credit for. This was a depression the last 10 years. Governor Granholm mostly had to serve during that whole time of the meltdown of the auto industry and very difficult times. But I think a lot of what she and the governor, when you think about their unity on things like early childhood with you and things of that nature, is really remarkable and going to help our state. The team here at MDE, I mean, you know, well, let me just show this again for a minute. I mean, I don't, I got to set the stage because this went so quickly this morning. We don't have a really good video of this, but this is, Ben, would you raise your hand a minute? This is, yeah, you can't look, this is Ben pretending he's a game show host. So I want you to look closer this time, the way he's dressed and everything.
With the mustache?
Two separate categories.
Mike's big ideas. What was he thinking?
Mike's big ideas. But it was a nice mockery. I mean, and I went home and said to my wife, how much of that's like real? And she said, most of it. I said, they were like inferring I was type A or something. She goes, But I can't tell you, I know you see this, I do think there's a good balance you've reached on presentations, but allowing our staff to come in and show off to you once in a while is why we appreciate when at agenda planning you let, not only for your own edification, but sometimes it's a reward to them to be able to come in here and show you what they do and what they accomplish. And I'll a little more on the 25th, but each and every one of them, I really have said this when I used to be able to counsel folks at MASA, is this is all about hiring, don't ever hire someone dumber than you. It's just that simple. Every chance you get someone smarter than you in that area, and I've been proud to be able to do that here in this department, and we've got just exceptional people. There's been last week's hearings got a little testy again at one point, but overall we have very good people in state legislative posts. They have different beliefs perhaps, but they care about our state. They're trying to do the right thing. Even though locking horns a couple of times, and it'll be difficult for Brian. I want to just give him some cover right out of the block. Sometimes even when you know you need to think a little bit more about something, you're put right on the spot with tough questions at committee hearings, and you just do the best you can. And I appreciate the board's indulgence. At times I think I've probably, regretted some things I said and overstepped perhaps. I want to thank the people in our schools. I mean, the article today, I think about it with my daughter, the teacher, but they work very hard. And they're very underappreciated. And when you think about it, we've got 250,000 people that work in our schools. And whether it's a custodian, I mean, one of my mentors in New York was actually a bus-todian in those days. Half-time bus driver, half-time custodian, Pat. And this guy was a mentor to us. He was like a second father figure. And they work very hard, and I want to thank them. In the Bridge article you'll get to read at some point, but just one little piece of it was teachers have a powerful impact on thousands of kids during their careers. They have a far greater impact on students than does a state superintendent, genuinely. And for many students, the teachers are their difference makers. Teachers instruct, they encourage, they motivate, they inspire, they nurture, they create, they rescue. And I am so proud of our teachers, including my daughter, Krista. They are lifesavers and life builders. Brian did this too the other night, by the way. You're not getting away from this. He was a little, but they give our children hope. So please take time today to thank one. I do want to show a couple of pics first one. Those first ones before maybe Anna. This is from the other day, but it'll lead up to, that's Ella, who was here on Friday. She's gotten older. Kyle was the MC for the day. Okay. Come on, Ben, you think you're the big-time dresser, buddy. That was pathetic. And then, and finally, it's, I gave a teamwork coin to my wife, Anna. She's been here, good times. You and she during the cancer bout. Very much appreciate, and I love her and wanted to acknowledge her as a key team member. So
she's a pretty team member.
Yeah, we've raised some great kids together, and she's wonderful. Anyway, And then I've got some stuff for Brian, but it's the very end of the meeting, and I'm done. Clearly done. But thanks so much.
Your granddaughter looked like a little Adam.
She did. Thanks so much for the opportunity, too, to be here. Yes, she does. That's
Yes,
right.
look darling.
So, Brian, you've got to stick to the end here, buddy. I got something for you.
Oh, I get to leave.
So we're going to go, did we want to go in order, or did you want to, and add the reading part? Did we pick a spot for that, or how would you like to do that, John? First one's a discussion of 2 alternative nominations. Why don't we work,
Yes, let's do that.
let's do that first. The 2 alternate nominations to the Special Ed Advisory Committee. At the March 17th meeting, the board approved nominations. Subsequently, the Michigan Association of Administrators of Special Ed and the Association of Teachers of Children with Emotional Impairments submitted nominations for alternates to their organization. The board is asked to approve these 2 nominations. Any discussion? Yes.
I move that we approve the nominations.
Support.
Moved by Kath, supported by Michelle. Any further discussion? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, same? Great, thank you. Thanks, Lynn, that was excellent.
Thank you.
Before we do our legislative report, as Marty comes up here, come on up, Marty, but you'll get to know, Brian, that one thing is, even though Representative Pockton can be tough on you at committee hearings once in a while, he'll immediately send you pictures of the event with a smile on it. He's already done that with Karen. He sent me 3 this time, so I'm assuming since Kyle and Dan were also in it, that they're meant for you guys, so maybe Dan or you can get them that also.
I wonder if we could do the 3rd grade reading work group discussion first, just because the legislative, we got a bunch
Sure.
of items and it could take a little while to work through. And
Okay.
is that all right?
Absolutely.
Well, I guess, Karen, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you're willing to help us appreciate what's in the work group report, I think this group has been eager to try to be supportive of whatever legislation or whatever framework that helps us deliver on 3rd grade reading, but that does so in a way that actually supports the whatever tools, whatever practices can help kids read, not just flunk them if they don't, So I think this, from what I gather, reading and what I've seen the coverage of this work group report with a lot of good people involved, is that it may be a really helpful framework and thoughtful framework for how we can advance 3rd grade reading effectively. And I think we're all trying to appreciate what the ideas are, and then I would hope we would be supportive of whatever version of this can be most powerfully made real in form of whatever legislative accompaniments, because I think this is one of the shorter term priorities for all of us to try to get right. So, if you're willing to talk us through this, that would be very helpful. But yeah, but we do have copies of it now, and I know. Sorry.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to give you a little bit of background, and then maybe just touch on the recommendations briefly and go from there. The governor asked the work group to come together as just after his State of the State address, and this was a bipartisan, bicameral education leadership group of legislators. In addition, and they were chaired by John Kennedy, who's a leading businessman out of the Grand Rapids area. And then there were some staff and executive team folks who were working to support the work group, getting them information and connecting them with various resources across the state. And the work was informed by literally 2 to 3 months worth of professionals from education, K-12 and post-secondary, and the department, who came in at the invitation of the work group to really share everything that they were experiencing around early literacy. It's called the 3rd grade work group, but it's an early literacy study group. And that became really clear to the group very, very quickly. So they heard from K-12 educators, both traditional and charter. They heard from post-secondary, schools of education. Vanessa, I think, was a guest at least twice in the various conversations with the work group, so that they could gain a real good understanding of what was working and where it was working and why it was working. with the overall goal that we all share, and that's the most one of the most important goalposts, as you all know, is early literacy. And while I know that educators sort of cringe at that, you have to learn to read before you can read to learn piece, because we actually teach reading and literacy much beyond third grade. That was the driving force. That if we can't get our littlest students to be confident and comfortable with their reading skills, that they would then face challenges. Again, nothing you don't all know as part and parcel of what you do here. But they dug pretty deep, and as Vanessa can tell you from being there a couple of times, they wanted to understand the difference between diagnostic tools and growth tools. They wanted to understand the difference between NAEP and MEEP. They wanted to understand how these things interplay, how they don't. So to the extent that they had a limited amount of time and needed to produce a report, they dove as deep as they could, I think, into the dynamics of early literacy. So what came out of that is the report that you have in your hands right now, and there are 5 key recommendations, none of which are probably going to surprise anyone who's been doing any work in early literacy for any amount of time, because the recommendations truly would be supported by literally dozens of years of research in terms of solid evidence around what works. So generally speaking, it is around a multi-tiered system of support and intervention model in early literacy, diagnose early, diagnose often, and then know what to do with the data when you do that. So it really is about, do teachers have the tools that they need? Do teachers know what to do with the data they get from those tools? And do they know how to intervene at the student-specific level when a student demonstrates any struggle in early literacy? Do they know what to do next? So that's part and parcel. Now, there were components of that they wanted to see more time dedicated to reading and reading-associated activities. K-3. So there were pieces of that. Teacher development is one of the big recommendations. We can't expect teachers to know how to do the diagnostic work and how to intervene if we don't train them appropriately to do so. They also talked a lot about post-secondary's role in preparing new teachers in that area, so that they had robust early literacy, especially if they're K-8 certified teacher, that they had the credentials that they needed to teach reading K-3. And what could that look like? And then how do we backfill for those teachers who maybe didn't get all of that kind of preparation? And then there's a strong parent component in the recommendations about what are our leading practices nationwide about parent engagement around early literacy. And not just a read to your child every night. While that is important, it's even broader, understanding the importance of early literacy, understanding how children are engaged in early literacy, and what scores and diagnostics might mean, so that parents understand the challenges their children are facing. So really that parent campaign, which I think gets expanded to a community campaign in so many ways to wrap around early literacy. And then there was just the ongoing need not to take our foot off the pedal, if you will, once we've made gains and achievement in that area. They did a lot of study on other states, and one of the things, for instance, some of the experts came in from around the country and said, we did a great job focusing on K-3, and then said, got that done and took their feet off of the pedal, and then they lost some of that gain moving beyond third grade. So their challenge to the work group was, don't do that. Don't stop just because you're going to make gains, and you will. If you focus, you'll make gains. And then just keep going. Don't pull your foot off the pedal. So you're going to see a recommendation for continuing to have assessment data available to teachers and systems, and having an oversight commission statewide that would task the multiple stakeholders to stay engaged with these efforts in literacy for the state of Michigan. So those were the core pieces of the report. It was handed to the governor as requested that they do that work. Last week there was a news conference around the release of the report and the work. As you know, the governor recommended a considerable amount of additional investment into early literacy efforts. The concurrence budget looks to contain many of those components, and everyone's very excited about that. A lot of acknowledgement, and Vanessa was wonderful in this, of understanding what interim assessments can do, K-3, and the importance of those in addition to the diagnostic tools. So there's a call for those assessments. So I think a lot of continuity with where you're going as a board and where the department has been going as well.
Thanks, Karen. I'm sure there's questions. I have just two. One, as I said, everyone wants us to hit this mark of success in third grade reading. The early concerns about legislation were the kind of no promotion without any of the support systems to make sure that you actually delivered on literacy at that age. So this sounds really helpful and good in terms of some of the supports and early diagnosis that would be effective, and resources too to support this kind of initiative. The smart promotion piece, seemed like a nice, or at least perhaps an effective way to square that circle of holding them back if they can't read. And can you just elaborate a bit on what that idea is, that they advance in what they're proficient, but they get extra time and intervention if they're not reading successfully?
Right. And it's loosely framed in the report because the work group acknowledged there was a lot of work that needed to go into what that might look like. There are models around the nation. So it was loosely framed in the report of this is something that we need to take a look at. And what happens in a smart promotion model is that a K-3 early elementary child who is 1 or more years behind in reading would be entitled to intense intervention, accurate diagnostic testing. Why? Why is a student behind? Is it instructional strategy? Is it a learning disability? What's going on here? Is it an ESL situation? Is it an adverse climate situation? What's going on with this child that they are more than a year behind in reading proficiency, and how do we wrap around that child? It's something Mike, I think, has said a number of times. It's not about every child, it's about each child, and the difference in that is both subtle and profound. And this was really, I think, an acknowledgement that each child needs that kind of intervention, with the hope that certainly then they would close that gap on proficiency and move towards a more proficient standard. At the same time, recognizing that students have different strengths. And a student who might be struggling in reading may not be struggling in other topics at all, and they shouldn't be held back on those topics in any way, shape, or form. They should advance, they should accelerate, they should do whatever it is that they're strong in and keep moving on this piece. So that's the basic model around Smart Promote. Intervene early, intervene often. Let's get students back on track. Let's not wait till their third grade MyStep score to know that they're behind. Let's figure this out much earlier so that we can avoid retention if at all possible. If we have to give a child additional intervention, let's do it smart. Let's do it in a way that acknowledges what the child is really, really good at, and let's drive the appropriate interventions towards the child.
Thanks. The second question. So what's next? Are these recommendations going to be informing a new legislation, or the sponsors or whatever we've got out there willing to help adapt a legislative package to embed some of this strategy?
Well, I think that, what the governor's looking at is, there are multiple stakeholders on all of these. There may be policy issues. There certainly are just departmental collaboration issues. There's how do we work around this together, and so I think he's looking for the next steps now, and those could be various avenues. They won't all necessarily be policy, but some are appropriations, some are policy, and some will just be practice. So that's what we're looking at now. What's that mix? In moving forward, what's that mix?
Well, there's a lull for a second. I don't want to miss a chance to say that the recommendations I thought were outstanding. I think so that we don't continue to demoralize folks in the field unintentionally, and so that we give credit. It's hard to keep getting progress if you're not celebrating the progress you got. I have to continue to take exception with those that are using NAEP as the only way to do that. NAEP does not measure our state standards. Our teachers teach to the state standards. They're measured on the state standards. And when you look at that, 70% of our kids are proficient in reading at third grade. It's not what NAEP says, which is that 2/3 are not proficient. So I mean, I just think that they're both measures for different purposes perhaps, but I think the most important one is what's the one that measures our state standards, and the one that measures our state standards says 70% of our kids. That's a tremendous progress that our teachers have pulled off in a short period of time here in the right direction. We still have 30% to go, so this is, to say the least, an important effort. But yes, sir.
Related to that, what it says that according to NAEP, 69% are not proficient. What is the average for the 50 states?
Not great. You will find, I think average is 50%. Am I right on that, Vanessa? Is that about correct? A little bit lower than that. And you'll have a similar disparity in almost every state between their state assessment and their national assessment. So that is very, very typical. I'll tell you, partly challenging for the work group was knowing that Michigan's test is going to change a few times. And this is something we talked about when Vanessa was there. It was times the work group has talked about this. We're going to need something to measure our progress in the next few years by that's consistent. And within a lane, at least it compares if we're, making some progress within that lane of NAEP. There was an absolute acknowledgement that it wasn't MEEP and it's not M-STEP and whatever's coming next, but with those changes churning, it was a way to at least have a consistent measure, understanding fully that our tests are going to get better at, they do measure Michigan standards, and that measurement will be something we would like to, start to take a look at once we get 2 to 3 years of consistency with it.
If I could just say, if I may add to that, answer that in another way, an additional way, is unless presidential candidates or governors just continue to back off of the standards they've already agreed to, our state standards are very similar now to most of the other state standards. We've been able to measure it now this year for the first time, according to our state standards. We will again next year. There'll be very little difference, so you'll have at least a couple of years' data. And then I think you finally get to a point that, in fairness to NAEP, there's been no way until now to be able to try to look between states. So now that we're pretty much all going to have the same standards, as I said, unless a bunch of them run and blow it all up again because somehow they didn't mean what they thought, then you're going to have a way to look and say, number one, are we giving credit to teachers that have had success in reaching our standards? And then secondly, how do we do compared to other states with pretty much those same standards? Because we're finally going to get to that dawn.
At a second
Yes,
point.
sir.
And that is on page 2 to 3. And I pointed this out before, the statement is made, Michigan is one of only 5 states to lose ground in reading proficiency from 2003 to 2013. That's because around 2003, most of the states raised their entry level for school from December 1st to September 1st. We didn't get around to doing that until like a year or so ago. So, developmental issues are fundamentally important with kids being ready to read. So to add 5% of your total lifespan to your beginning students, I think is potentially the most significant thing that we have done to address this problem. But I'm disappointed that this very important salient fact is ignored in these analyses.
There are nuances in every state with NAEP data. I mean, there are nuances in every state. And obviously, this wasn't an empirical research. The methodology wasn't done this way. This was an environmental scan, which was informed by professionals in the state. And I don't think it purports to be more than that in the report. It's simply stating that data. And within that lane, that's where we are. If there's a bright spot perhaps, and Vanessa pointed this out quite well, when we look at the M-STEP data going forward, it may not be going in that upward direction that we perhaps, and so maybe the NAEP will be up as we move forward. It's hard to say, what's going to shake out with that as Michigan standards get tougher and get broader in dimension around early literacy beyond reading and writing. We're going to see what that does with our scores across the board. But I think Mike's point is solid, and that's that it really comes down to the teacher in the classroom. I think that's what this committee said. At the end of the day, it comes down to the teacher in the classroom, right tools, right preparation, right continuing education, and then knowing how to intervene. and that being the given in early literacy education, not the exception in early literacy education.
Michelle, please.
I agree with you, and I appreciate the work that's been done and sort of moving back from the position of just retaining without supports. So this, I think, is great. I love the fact that it's bipartisan. I also wanted to respond to something that Richard said. Also, between 2003 and 2013, Michigan experienced a horrific recession. And so our child poverty rate went through the roof. Our concentrations of poverty in the city skyrocketed. And so I think, and then there's been studies that show that, where there is poverty, there are lower test scores. Not that the kids are not intelligent, but they are lower test scores. So, so I think, addressing issues around poverty, and also in a lot of the deficit districts, they have not had some of the supports that are needed, particularly the ballooning class sizes, the huge class sizes, and it's, to me, and I don't know if I'm assuming that this was discussed by the work group.
It's addressed quite extensively in the report.
Yeah, I was just trying to scan it really
issues.
quickly.
Yeah.
I saw the summary, but I didn't see that. So, but I didn't see them specifically say, unless I missed it, that recommending smaller class sizes for the earlier grades. Is that something?
But it was interesting when they brought in professionals from around the state, educators, teachers around the state. They were really, their interest was really, I think, heightened and informed by the poverty issue. Certainly the legislators, this was not any surprise that there was a high correlation, and they were looking at some work not only from my Blissey, but the Reading Now Network out of the west side of the state that showed that correlation between reading scores and free and reduced lunch. So they came in very well prepared to have that conversation. I think they made a point of really hearing from educators who worked in high poverty environments and were getting outstanding results with those same populations. So in your parlance, the beating the odds schools, if you will. So same demographic profile, high poverty, very diverse and very different scores. And what were they doing? What were they doing differently? And we saw it over and over and over again in those schools that were outperforming their demographic peer regardless of the level of poverty. And that's what the committee, the work group, really looked at. What was going on there? And it was absolutely common everywhere that we looked, where the impact of poverty was absolutely mitigated by the intense intervention and early diagnostics of this approach. So it got to be almost like a broken record. It almost didn't matter in some of these schools. I mean, we're talking Beecher. We're talking with some schools who face some interesting challenges, who came in and with intense parent information campaigns, understanding their data, using tools with fidelity and across the environment, good data-rich conversations with educators. That it absolutely mitigated that impact. So while the report acknowledges that there is an adverse trend line, or an inverse trend line, it certainly is not, it does not have to be destiny. And in fact, it is the impact of the teacher in the classroom, well prepared, well trained, and well equipped, that is the mitigating factor.
And I understand that, but I also know that the exceptions are pretty much outliers, and that the poverty that is in a community is pretty closely related to how they do on test scores. So I think, and there's also a lot of research that shows that an effective tool is having smaller class sizes. So even though there might be some examples of what happens, and I'm sure that works well, but I would say just training the teacher in the curriculum without looking at the community outside and the impact of that on especially if we're going to be comparing schools and holding them all to the same common standard, I think it has to, I don't think we can ignore the very strong impact that what goes on outside of the school has on what happens in that classroom. So that's all I'm saying. So I think that what it looks like it's, there's some real key things that were found out about how to really improve the instruction. But if the kid's not showing up to school because their mother has them home for whatever reason, because it's chaotic, you know what I mean? So there's the to connect. And I just wanted to say one last point. This really annoys the heck out of me about NAEP scores. People always talk about, well, they're not proficient. Well, under NAEP there's 4. There's basic, and then below basic, proficient, and advanced. So when you look at proficient, that's considered an A score. Basic is a B and a C. So if you're saying they're not proficient, you're saying they're not an A student. So it's that people misquote that NAEP scores constantly to exaggerate for whatever their position, or maybe for no reason at all except that it's wrong. So but it seems to me that they like to use it to say how failing everybody is, when it means it's sort of a distortion of the facts to say they're not proficient. So you're saying they're not an A student. They're a B or a C student. So it really, what you should be looking at is who is going below basic as really not being making, that are really in trouble. So.
Thank you, Michelle.
While we're on NAEP, to get back to the question, I needed to check it. The NAEP's state nationwide percent proficient, to Michelle's point about what proficient means on NAEP, was 34%. Michigan was 31%. And the percent of states proficient range from 17 on the low end to 48 on the high end for 4th grade reading proficiency. Partly that has to do with what Michelle is saying about what proficient means on this assessment. It's a high bar, and so it is a good measure for us to have. It's a statewide comparison, but it's not per se equivalent to a measurement of state standards, like Mike said. So just to give you some context about the nationwide.
And the work group didn't relate it to anything else than the comparison in the lane to other states, in which case then it's an apples to apples comparison.
I just think the kind of the collision of EdTrust and this certainly made it look like the sky is falling when no one has reached 50% on NAEP proficiency, and then the teachers in the buildings feel like, oh my God, I've done all this work and it hasn't worked. That's the problem. I think it was Melody who's had some experience in this area, and then Kathleen.
Well, I'd just like to add to what Michelle said in the sense that class size really impacts every aspect of a classroom, but specifically with reading instruction, because if you have even a very strong teacher who has a strong background in instructional strategies and reading, acquisition and comprehension, they aren't able to implement those strategies as often with students that need it when they have 32 kids in a class versus 22 kids in a class. So, and even thinking about schools that don't have high poverty, in the last decade, the funding has been cut dramatically. Therefore, we no longer have parapros, and I think we talked about this at the last one. We don't have school counselors. We don't have any support staff. We don't even have ESL staff anymore. So a teacher at my school was saying that, 10 years ago, she'd be able to open the door and say she needed help, and there'd be adults. And then now you open the door and there's nobody. So you can't call on anybody for extra support. So even in areas where there aren't high poverty, we've really been stripped down to nothing. And then the funding issues have also increased class size. So, and then great programs like Reading Recovery, which are proven to be effective, have been stripped away unless you're Title I. So in some ways, if you don't have high poverty, or if you don't have those needs, then you have even less supports.
Yeah, you're going to see, appropriation recommendations on additional literacy coaches and reading specialists, understanding that support is helpful. Now not every educator will tell you it is. So, like everything else, it's not universal in terms of who's using what strategies to create that level of success. But there was a general acknowledgement that the specialists at that level could certainly provide additional support to both students who are struggling and teachers who needed support. So there'll be hopefully, some appropriation that will move forward on that as well. And none of it will be enough. We live in a time when there just simply isn't enough resource to do all of those things that are possible, and the work group understood that. So we have to start with the things that have the potential of having the highest impact. But there's such it really became clear there was such a wide variance in even how teachers are equipped to do their job, small or large class size, or how they've been prepared to do their job, small or large class size. Class size, by the way, was not a big, really didn't show up as the big variable. It was the supports driven into the class regardless of size, and some of those came from trained professionals, some of those came from volunteers, some of them came from team teaching. I mean, it was just a really interesting array of strategies around how many kids were in a space. So that's why class size in and of itself didn't show up in the report as the strategies, what you did with the resources around whatever size you had. And, you know, the work group heard from individuals who said, you know, look, we've optimized around early literacy. We've optimized people, we've optimized resources around early literacy, which means we may have sub-optimized it somewhere else in the system, but that's a dedication that we made of the resources. So that's where paras went, that's where specialists went, was in that early literacy construct in the building. Those are district by district, local control kinds of decisions, but in almost all these cases, these were base foundation grant districts. And buildings not getting any more than, in some cases, and this was the interesting part, some of them had sister buildings in the same district, basically same demographics, same resource mix, very different results. And so we looked at those buildings that were maybe outliers per se in terms of the whole, but also outliers within their own district where it's hard to argue it's curriculum or money or governance or demographic. It really was just the absolute, these interventions applied with fidelity across the board all the time that was producing that result. So that made an impact. It made a huge impact on the work group.
Thank you. Kathleen?
Yeah, well, I'm really glad this was done. I go back a long way. And I remember when I was working for the Senate Education Committee, we looked at this whole issue of early childhood reading. And we came up with the same idea. Class size made a huge difference. And what we proposed was the weighted pupil formula in the school aid bill, but putting more money into the first 3 grades rather than the high school. The first 3, so you would have small class size and maybe an aide in the room. And we know that and it passed the Senate in those days, but it didn't get through the House. But later, when I was at Model Neighborhoods in Detroit, we had money for schools, and we made the class size no more than 20, and we put an aide in every room, a parapro in every room. And lo and behold, kids did better. The scores went up. But that program ended, and we didn't have the money to do that anymore, and then when I was on the early days on the state board, which goes back 20 years, I went into schools where they had early intervention in either kindergarten, in first grade, second grade, and not only did the kids read, but their numbers of kids designated as special ed declined. And the Mablisi, which you referred to, I'm glad you referenced that because that's showing the same thing. The whole idea is to reduce the special ed load by early intervention, and it works. So we know what works, but it does need a lot of special training for the teachers. That's a big, big part of it, to have really good professional development. Good for in the preparation institutions first, but those that are teaching already, many of them know these things, but you have to have the resources for the early intervention and their ability to actually know, as you say, what to do with the data that they collect. The other thing is we're putting, which I'm really grateful for, is we're putting more emphasis on the early childhood or kindergarten, which will help some of these kids. They'll come to kindergarten at least knowing their letters and their numbers and colors, and things that many of them come to kindergarten now who don't know those things.
Yes. Yeah, it's a problem that doesn't start at the kindergarten door.
Middle-class people like us, it's hard to understand that some children come to school not knowing those things. we take it for granted, because we have a baby, we love cuddling the baby and reading to the baby and singing to the baby and talking to the baby, which seems to come natural, but it doesn't to everybody. They have to be taught. So getting the parent involvement in a way that respects them is very critical, I think, too. And that's not easy to do. It has to be careful that we don't in some way demean the parents. We have to treat them with the utmost respect.
And there's some great national models out there
Yes,
for
and we
that
should
right
be
now.
doing-
And there's some
we've
great
been
models in
talking about
Michigan. Grand Rapids Parent University is a great model. There are GRPS. There are some other great models of parent engagement right now in the state. We need to look at those, and then we need to look at data coming out of other states that are maybe a little ahead of us in terms of that parent engagement model. So that's part of the recommendation of the report.
I know that it's very important, because, years ago we had these 5 task forces, like one of the task forces, way to improve education. One of them was community involvement, parental involvement, which we recognized, 10, 15 years ago that we needed that. And I know in many schools they treated the parents as the enemy. They didn't like parents in the classroom and all that stuff. It's just the wrong approach. And we have to engage them in a positive way, not that they just come in and criticize, but that they come in and support and be partners.
Well, it's
So
taken
all these things, so it's good to do all the things that we recommend, but we just have to do it now.
Right.
And we need the resources. It's good to do it and recommend it.
We have to turn it into an action plan.
We have to do it because we know the early intervention works. I've seen it in school after school.
It's taken a
People have
while.
been trying to sell it for years.
It's taken a while for the rest of the state to catch up with the board, and seriously.
Yeah.
So, and with you, Kath, so I think it's really a great kind of moment in time, bipartisan moment. These are,
The time is now.
time is now. John?
Lupe, they said the parents' model in Grand Rapids is the best. I was surprised I didn't
Yeah.
hear an exclamation on that
I'm glad
point.
you all took note of that.
Well, of course, I would beg to differ.
So-
So there's good models all
Yeah.
there.
Thank you very much for being willing to explain the
my
work group
pleasure.
report. I don't think we need a formal action, but I hope that people are comfortable with some sort of sense of the board, that we really applaud the work of the work group and our staff for informing it, and encourage that it be used as a guide for policy, practice, budget, legislation, and let us know what else we can do to be helpful.
I appreciate that. I really do, and I really want to thank the team here who was, they just provided so much information to the team. I mean, poor Vanessa was on speed dial with me, just getting me information and making sure that we had the right data, coming to the work group a couple of times, and being there to answer literally any question that they had. I appreciate Mike's support on that as well, and I appreciate, giving me an opportunity to share the work group's work. And if I could just take 30 more seconds, I would like to pass on my congratulations to Mike today as well. I know the executive office has, whatever it's going to do on the 25th, but I would be remiss if, at least I think that's the date now.
We got that
5:30.
You got that
locked
down? I'd be remiss if I didn't pass my thanks on to Mike for your leadership, not only over the 10 years that you have been in a difficult role at a difficult time, but just for the personal guidance and advice and counsel that you've given me over the last few months, how much I appreciate that. I don't know if you remember this, Mike, but 10 years ago when you got the job, I sent you an email with 2 words that said, "Defy gravity." And I think that's what you have done so wonderfully in this amount of time, is you've said, well, that's what is, but what could be, and really had the heart of 1.5 million kids, first and foremost, with all of your activities and actions over the course of these 10 years. I applaud your leadership, and the state of Michigan owes you certainly a debt of gratitude for that service and that leadership. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Karen. Thanks so much. We're lucky to have you. And Lois, by the way, this is a person, a lot of times it's the folks that Lois is encouraging, has been personally encouraging to me. Karen, more you to me than me to you. You're being modest, but there's a lot of folks around that help make us try to get some progress. Thank you, ma'am. So we're going to go, Marty, was that on your time there then, or does that count towards yours, or probably not?
Exceed expectations.
Yeah.
The State Board's Legislative Committee met on June 2nd. Chairman Ulbrich was not in attendance, and Kathy Strauss sat in as chair. We discussed a number of issues. As John mentioned in his report, the state legislature passed the budget. They included 2x per pupil funding, which means more money goes to the lower school districts that got the lower foundation. So the increases range from $70 to $140 per pupil, depending on the district. The $70 million increase in at-risk funding, which John mentioned. Interesting that the $70 million, the legislature included that money must go to school-wide multi-tier system of support for K through 3 reading. There's $26.4 million included for the early literacy. I'm guessing to work a lot with what the report says. In addition, the Department of Management budget, their budget included $500,000 for an adequacy study, which was part of the agreement in the lame duck. So they are going to include that money to conduct a study. And we have not yet heard back from the director of DTMB on the board's offer to be participants in developing the RFP. We are reaching out again to the director over there to reiterate the board's interest in doing that. A number of other pieces of legislation did come up in conversation, and some statements were developed to address those. So I'll pass it over to Kathleen Strauss to discuss those statements.
Marty, we discussed several different pieces of legislation that are in the hopper and took off from there. And one was the bill on counseling. There was a bill introduced that required a course in teacher preparation, educator preparation institutions, that there be a course to teach future counselors how to counsel students to attend college or apply to college, or which college to go to, and so forth. And there was some pushback on that first of all, they shouldn't be prescribing a course. And we prepared a draft statement. Did you have that?
Yep, got it right here.
Yeah.
Arch is on top of everything. I know you know that, but.
The committee recommended that we
Yes.
take a position on some of these bills. So it's,
Kathleen, this I know, this does reflect the latest kind of back and forth that we had about what I understood to be the author of the legislation is also.
that's what I was going to
Yeah.
come to. Go ahead.
Some of the discussion about how we enhance both the capacity, meaning the numbers of school counselors, because we have a 700-to-1 ratio, and some of the ways we enhance their ability to do good college and career guidance as part of their work, have been going on with many stakeholders, and some of it's in this post-secondary credential attainment work group that a number of that I've been facilitating. So I know this legislation was an effort to try to enhance the college and career guidance skill by expecting it to be more fully made as part of their professional preparation and training. Apparently, the author of the legislation is also eager, by reports, to respond to the kind of concerns of the Counselors Association who want a specific new course, but were supportive of more professional development and expectations that they do enhance their skills through ongoing college and career guidance, professional development. And so my understanding is this legislation is likely to be reiterated again to take that approach, which I think could be supported by all. And so this statement, I think, now reflects our support for increasing the capacity of our counseling corps so that they can do the job of advising students on both high school and post-secondary options. and that they enhance their skills, where the last sentence was the one or two that we were wrestling with, that we support legislation that does enhance their college and career guidance skills through ongoing professional development and support, which I think is...
And so the legislation now calls for professional development rather than a specific course in preparation institutions.
So I strongly support this, and I strongly support all efforts to enhance both the capacity of our counseling corps and their skill at doing their job, which includes college career
The
guidance.
statement also points out that the state board has already approved standards for the education preparatory institutions that cover what counselors should know, including what they should know about college guidance. So we've already done that it's in the standards, and that should not be done by the legislature. So this would just say they really support enhanced professional development for counselors to enhance their skills. So we could support that.
Would you like to move that,
So
Kathleen?
I'll move support of this
move that
statement on school counselors.
Approve this statement.
It's moved by Kathleen, supported by John. Any further discussion? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, same? Great, thank you. Next one.
The next one is one on homeschooling. You know, this has been an issue for many, many years. And years ago, with one of our board members, she really wanted to get something done on this. A Republican member of the board years ago. Thank you. And there's been a lot of publicity about it lately because of the terrible tragedy in Detroit with the children being found having been murdered, apparently by their mother. They had been removed from school, and she said they were being homeschooled, but we had no knowledge of if that was the case. Michigan is one of only 11 states that have no requirements even for registration, so that there's no way of knowing if children who disappear from public schools or were never registered in public schools are even being schooled someplace. We have a compulsory education law, so we really should have some knowledge of who is being homeschooled. And there has been legislation introduced that does require registration. It requires some reporting too for such as social workers or doctors or somebody else. Eileen raised a question about that was too much. So I adjusted this to just be registration, which would not be intrusive. Eileen said this wouldn't pass the legislature. That could be, but I think it's up to us. Mary pointed out again our role is supervision of all public education and responsibility to all the children, that we at least make a statement, even if it's not going to pass. Everything we support doesn't get through the legislature, so that's not the criteria. As far as I'm concerned, that's not the criterion to looking to. So this is just a very short statement, and I'm not going into the whole history of what the Free Press had up big articles about this and called for more accountability needed for homeschoolers. If we just ask for registration, I think we might have a chance. But anyway, I think we should make that statement. So this just says Michigan is one of only 11 states that have no requirements for registration for families that wish to homeschool their children. The State Board of Education has long been concerned that there is no way to know who is being homeschooled or how many children are being homeschooled. House Bill 4498 would require registration of homeschoolers. It is not intrusive. The state board supports such registration. Now, we might not want to mention the number of the bill. That's okay. I just want to make a statement to that effect. That's okay too. So,
is that a motion?
I move the
motion
support.
Support by John. Further discussion, Richard?
Question. I'm not going to support this particular resolution, but I do think that the issue is worth exploring a little more. And I should know this, but I don't. How do our truancy laws apply to, say, the children of aliens resident in the state?
Aliens?
Well, like the... I'm thinking of... No, I'm thinking like the Lebanese consul.
Is this
or
a
his
trick
kids.
question?
No.
Sorry, I don't mean to be
No, it's wait.
disrespectful.
Our children whose parents are resident Alabama, but happen to be living in Michigan. That would be the next question. But I want to start with non-U.S. citizens. Are they required to be in
We'll
school?
see if we can get an answer by the end of the meeting, but I don't know, unless.
Well, I would want to, if we
No,
develop a
exactly.
policy, I would want to take into account, well, who does the law cover, who doesn't it cover? Because we'd want to, I think we'd want, if we do something like this, I mean, like what the bill proposes, I think it needs to be part of a more comprehensive set of regulations, is what I'm saying.
Yes, sir.
I can talk for a while they look up the answer, Richard, but I remember when
Okay.
Carolyn was last year on the board
Right.
from Evert, Michigan, Engler's hometown. She says, and we were asking, is there anything you would like to help us get done? And she said, I really am worried about these homeschool. I just don't know. We don't know what's happening to them. And so we did look at it pretty hard at that time and tried to figure out a path to do something constructive. If I may be mistaken, I was mistaken about lots of things in line with Mike's party, but I think our law requires the homeschoolers to teach the same content that we expect.
Is anything in the law about
No,
homeschooling?
but we don't ask for anything else except that they're supposed to teach what we ask to be taught in schools. We don't even know who is being homeschooled. And when we looked at it hard before, it was like, one issue is most homeschoolers do a really good job because these are mostly, I think, motivated parents who really want to make sure their kid gets the education they need. So it's not really an issue, too, of there are folks probably who are lost or we don't know when something bad may be happening to them educationally or otherwise. But there also, one issue that emerged was there's sometimes, often, these kids are homeschooled for a while and then they reemerge in our public schools.
Right.
And if there was some knowledge, some communication among the local schools, and Karen and others who are real educators may have some perspective about just the fact that someone was being homeschooled, could it be helpful, encouraging communication so that when, as often the case, they do reemerge into the public system, there's some dialogue or there's some knowledge about what was their education like, how do we pick it up successfully, and encourage, successful next steps for kids who move in and out of homeschooling and education, which would be one good reason to try to at least have them have some knowledge of who in your community is being homeschooled, because they might show up in middle school after elementary or high school, or vice versa. So I support this. Information about who's being homeschooled starts with just the fact that they are being homeschooled, which might encourage some. Again, it's not because we were going to do anything to those kids, the state, that dictates how they are educated, except I think the law says they have to be taught the same stuff we expect all kids to be taught by whoever's homeschooling, by their parents. We're not going to barcode them or anything, but this could be a step to try to say this is at least reasonable, so that there's some communication, enough knowledge of who's out there, where are they, that might help facilitate interaction.
Well, two thoughts. One is we have parts of records, like immunization records. And as data systems develop, we're going to have to figure out how do medical records with the required immunizations, which have to be required part of the school records, how are these going to interact or interface? And the other thought, though, suddenly I remember that wasn't there a law that was overturned by a court case in Michigan a couple of years back that didn't we at one time require homeschoolers to register?
Yes, that was a law about for religious reasons. You can homeschool your children. You couldn't be questioned about it.
Okay,
That was about 30 years ago, actually.
So that has to be, in the 90s, I think.
20 years ago.
Okay.
25 years ago.
So what, we need to look at that law, I imagine, in order to, to determine the policy that would pass muster.
When the state school code was revised, when Clark Durant and Mike Warren were on the board, Mike Warren was working on the school code. they took out all the references to homeschooling.
Oh.
So there's practically nothing in there to restrict them. So
I did see,
that's the whole idea, is to get something back and that they should at least register.
Yes, right. right. I
Yes,
call
ma'am.
the question, please.
Call the question, okay. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, same?
Nay.
Thank you, motion still
Unless
passes.
we have to vote on the motion, right? That was just calling the question?
I guess you're
Yeah,
right.
that-
Yeah, and so let's call the, let's
Now vote.
vote on the motion then.
Vote on the motion.
All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, same?
Nay.
Thank you. Thank you for that elementary tip. It's only taken me
Okay,
10
well, we had
years.
two other issues that we have lengthier statements on. One is, we're very concerned about is what's going on in Detroit and what is being proposed for Detroit, to Detroit, for Detroit. And Michelle drafted a statement on that, which is the issue at the moment. Thank you.
Could I add, am I out of order if I add something?
No, you're not, man.
Yeah, I know. Like,
You're
I
out of
haven't
order to
added
yourself.
enough, yeah.
Well, write
You're out of
down-
order with yourself.
Write down the question.
Don't get in trouble with
first.
yourself.
Write down the question first, and I'll let you know.
I think I have 4 drafts.
But I just wanted to say that it's more than just Detroit, because the coalition, the Detroit Coalition and others are looking at broader, more of an urban or, a policy that would affect others similarly situated, and there's a lot, and it's growing. So I would say it doesn't just apply to Detroit, although that's the focus of the policy right now and
Yeah.
proposed legislation.
Good point. So, it should Kath or Marty?
Well, I think I want a chance to read it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Could take a while.
There you go. I took Evelyn Wood 20 years ago.
I could read it
Doesn't
out
work
loud.
anymore.
That'd be annoying.
4 years ago, actually. No, no. Not even if she's dead now, probably. Do this all the time. I'm tired of that.
So I understand the underlying piece was another addition
Yeah,
that
that's
was
what I added.
lifting from the coalition's recommendation. Would you mind, could I start off? Would you
Sure.
mind? I mean, I really appreciate, Karen, again, the discussion we had around this whole topic with you, and thought it was a very good opportunity for both us to listen, us to share concerns, issues, ideas, and many people care about, trying to have an effective Detroit effort and structure and process to proceed. And I really appreciate, I think the governor, I know, is working to try to get the most effective formula for how we can manage success in the fabric of the family of schools that are the Detroit student-serving schools. And so I think I encourage Michelle to take a crack at sort of a reflection on our position vis-a-vis this discussion, given her role in the coalition. And I think I appreciate and I support the statement. For me, the best possible strategy gets as close to the coalition recommendations as possible, and also appreciates or maybe takes advantage of Mayor Duggan's perhaps new willingness to maybe take some accountability, because the two features that I was caring about was how do we make sure any commission or entity that tries to manage a quality system and make sure all kids have a quality education has the ability to do that job, and that's important. And to the degree it can be done with the different interests, it would be really helpful if a body that is responsible for the Detroit public schools was politically accountable to Detroiters through the board, through a mayor, which may be better given this board's functional, but we all know boards don't always function as you hope they do. So I really appreciate that political accountability. To the degree we can encourage that would be very helpful to avoid the takeover outside interest. But so I think reiterating that, appreciating very much I think where the governor has taken this, and now saying to the degree we can get the final effort to be as close to the contours of this kind of framework is our encouragement and our recommendation. That's at least my personal sense of what was helpful for us to say. Others may have their own perspective.
Well, there's a sort of a later version of this that refers to that with reference to Mayor Duggan's proposal for copies of this, I guess.
Yeah, Kathy gave me some advice of make it
She was
shorter.
a later, okay.
Make it
I thought this
shorter.
was the latest
No,
version.
this was.
So you cut all that stuff out?
No, what I did was I condensed, a lot of the things that are written in this fourth paragraph are recommendations. Most of this are recommendations from the coalition. So what I did is I just said that we endorse implementation of the recommendations. So instead of spelling them all out, I put them, I condensed it into just the recommendations, and this is, you can look at it. I did want to pay special attention to stuff around funding, so
Is this version?
No, that shows you where I cut it up, unless you want to see where it's that version. Sorry,
Okay.
I have too many words, way too many words. This is what it looks like clean, that's what it looks like
Okay.
marked up.
You
That's
can-
the markup.
You can have the markup, and you
Or-
can have the clean, too.
Yeah, it's easier to read the clean, but if you want
Okay,
to see
thank
what
you.
I did, you can see the markup. So under the recommendations, given that we had all these, spent so much time looking at what would be a better funding model, and we really looked at differentiated funding was a theme that seemed to really come through. I put that down in the fourth paragraph, is that we support that and noted differentiated funding, and also using a 3-year budget projection model rather than the count day every year model, which creates a lot of instability. Now, that's something that was more emphasized with the coalition, but I think it makes a lot of sense in providing more stability. Because the main thing that I got out of that coalition group was that we need stability. We need to stop all the churning and changing and in the classroom, in the schools, in the curriculum, in everything. And one way to do that would to be use 3-year budget projections rather than a year-to-year count that fluctuates so intensely. Also noting increasing the state funding and appreciating that the governor is working hard to do that, and it's hard in this environment to do that after the bankruptcy and all that, but and noting that the willingness and the ability of the state to do this is really important to eliminate the debt, and noting that so much of the time was under state emergency management, which people seem to recognize the responsibility connected to that from the state. So I also wanted to note on governance that we support an elected school board and also a commission that is appointed by a Detroit elected body, such as the mayor or school board. So, and I think that's the significant things. Also, Mayor Duggan also suggested, had in his, on Mackinac Island in his speech, and which I thought was very important as well, and I think it's something we all agree on. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Is to have a more universal and comprehensive performance standards that are not that really look at the whole school, the whole picture, and not over reliant on standardized testing. So anyway, that's the changes and that's the emphasis of this paragraph. It's a lot. At the end of the day.
Kathy always gives good advice.
Yeah. Yes.
It's wise to take it.
That's the meat of it.
So is there a motion for discussion purposes?
I just want to know what background does Mayor Duggan have besides being a mayor in the educational field that he knows all of these things?
Oh, probably as much as the governor. I don't know. I mean.
I would view, the important point is not that, but in my view, Lupe, he was elected by the people of Detroit, and so no one can argue about sort of who's responsible for appointments. He could appoint excellent people, like Dan Varner would be a good choice, to head whatever commission, who know a lot about education, and he's smart enough, certainly, to know how to pick or appoint top educational people to anything to do with education. I mean, that's what good leaders, mayors, governors do. Governor picks Karen to be his advisor, a very sharp guy, she knows education.
With strong educational background.
Right, so I would imagine the mayor would have the smarts to appoint to either a commission or board or to run a portfolio of schools, someone who is a really top educational practitioner and person.
Well, I have a differing perspective on that. I believe Mayor Duggan had served on the Wayne County Commission. And then he became the head of the Detroit Medical Center. And he had no background in medicine. But he really cleaned up that complex organization and made it efficient, and that's what gave him the prestige so that people in Detroit elected him as mayor. So I think that he as an individual has the competency for this kind of position. I'm not saying that I support the structure, but I think the mayor has my confidence. Now the question is, will this be true of future mayors? Because you got to envision not and I've had some arguments with some of my colleagues to the right. You don't use laws to benefit the person or the position of the party or the individual, because those same laws can't be used against you after the next election. So we want to is this a structure, one that will function for foreseeable mayors of the city of Detroit for the benefit of the schools?
You may still make your point, but I'm pretty sure Mayor Duggan was deputy county executive under Ed McNamara, and then he was elected Wayne County prosecutor, which has nothing to do with education.
Right.
And then he was took on the head of the DMC.
Yeah.
And now he was elected mayor. So I
Bridget's
don't know if that
vote
helps
is
or
well
hurts your
taken,
case.
but he's very smart.
So what are you suggesting, that it should go to the school board as opposed? or
No,
that it should
I
go
just
to-
wanted to hear, because I don't know him,
Oh.
just what I read about him, so I wanted some testimonies as to, the impact he would have on.
I'm going to add a little bit of the story, but I knew Ed McNamara pretty well, and we were talking about that Wayne Reese at the time did all the Head Start centers, and we didn't have the other wraparound services that the county had. So we were having dinner, and I said, well, I wonder if it should be the county thinks about that, because you've already got all these other wraparound. It's coming up for, so he sends this guy over to work it out, a guy named Duggan. we pretty quickly realized, I think we're being outsmarted here. We have to take a deep breath. Sharp guy, but, you know, to your point, I didn't know him till then either, and he's, good question, though. I mean, it's relying on leadership. It's one reason I think the library, this ultimately is about leadership.
Richard's point is well taken, too. though, you know,
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Successor.
Okay, so-
Change the law.
Any other discussion, or can I have a motion?
I think we did.
You moved it, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, I moved. Silently, I moved it.
Motion by Michelle, and supported by John. Further discussion? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, same?
Yay.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one more item. There's also a bill in the legislature that would, related to truancy, that children of welfare families truant over, I don't know the details, but constantly truant, that the welfare checks would be cut off to their families. And the committee was opposed to that notion. And drafted a statement on that bill, which is, just got distributed. Get a chance to read that. Thank you. Okay, you ready? Well, what this says, the Michigan State Board of Education supports the goal of increasing school attendance of all Michigan students. We recognize that just one missed school day is a lost opportunity for students to learn, and that research shows that there is a connection between student attendance and student achievement. Moreover, as board members, we strongly urge all students to be consistently in attendance at school, learning and getting the education needed to end the cycle of poverty. However, the Michigan State Board of Education does not support House Bill 4041, which is aimed at terminating cash assistance for families of a child between the ages 6 and 15 is considered truant by their local school district, or for the minor alone if over age 16, and then it goes on. So, the committee recommended that we take a position on this bill as well. I so move.
Support.
Moved by Kathleen, supported by John. Discussion.
And I really appreciate your drafting this, and maybe, can you share a little bit about why this makes no sense? I mean, I personally, I think those of us who have, semi-functional families have no understanding of kids and the stress and families or non-families, if it's not even a family with parents who are able to tune in for all sorts of reasons, that there's no ability, this has no impact whatsoever except to punish more. It doesn't do anything constructive to help kids
Doesn't
learn,
dissolve the problem.
and help their families
The problem of-
function as most of us assume families should be able to function.
So I think you answered the question. I mean, I think it's just meant to punish children who are living in poverty for being true. I mean, part of the reasons that they may be truant may be caused by poverty. So, I mean, I think it's just going to just further perpetuate that cycle, or not think, it will further perpetuate that cycle. I don't think that a punitive measure is what's going to get the students to school. And I really looked at children, because children, for many, they don't necessarily have the control over what they are going to be punished for. So
I would like,
Yes, ma'am.
you know, and come to think of it, my understanding is that DHS is actually, or DHHS, is actually instituting this within their policy. And this would just codify, make it a law. But they are actually terminating the benefits when doing this. So I might want to, as an amendment to it, just make note that practice should cease for all the reasons you write here, that we recommend that practice cease. Not that we have any control over that, except that for, its connection to education.
Nice amendment to the motion. Are you good? Okay. Other discussion?
Well, I don't view it as a punitive. It certainly seeks to motivate in a tangible way families to see that their children come to school. I'm not sure that I would be in favor of the bill. I have the feeling that a little bit like House Bill 4498, that it was a reaction to the Blair story in the news. And it's never a good idea to respond with in a knee-jerk fashion with laws to sensational stories. So I don't know. I just I think we ought not view it as punitive, but I think that if the Department of Human Services already has the discretion to do this, maybe that needs to be left in their hands as depending on the case. Presumably someone on the ground is going to make the decision as to whether funds are being squandered by the family, which is more interested in something other than their children's welfare, or if cutting off the funds would make things worse on the children or not. So perhaps this is a decision best left to the local workers. The problem is that I can't vote against Bill 4041 without also voting for the rationale. And so the rationale that we have here is what I reject.
What part of the rationale that you object to?
Yeah, that in every case that this will make things harder for kids. I mean, obviously the intent is to make things better for kids by encouraging parents to see that they're in school.
So cutting off food stamps and assistance you think would motivate parents to take their kids to school when they haven't already?
Well, that certainly gives the Department of Human Services a reason to investigate and maybe check out the freezers in that home.
So we should check the homeschoolers? I mean, because that woman was saying she was homeschooling.
Mhm.
Anyway, so.
Well, I think we should adopt policies against lying, because that was the woman's crime. It had nothing to do with the people she lied about.
Okay, this could
All right.
spiral. But it's really helpful, Richard, for you to, your reflections as always are.
I would suggest that
you.
discussion extend to the
Yeah.
August meeting.
Hey, but I appreciate your comments about the legislation itself may or may not be the best approach, but you're understand why you can't support this statement. I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, it seems like a
So-
simplistic answer to a difficult problem, and those simplistic answers are not usually the answer. They usually create more problems than they solve.
Why
That's what
not?
I'm afraid this bill would do, that would create more problems than it solves.
So.
Why not
I'll-
just go find out why the kids aren't coming to school, which is what some
Which
districts
is
are doing.
what they do now, I believe.
Well, yeah, I think some do. and
Some do if they haven't staffed.
And there
to
was
do
some
it.
really good research that I read, and it did point to looking at the school environment, looking at physical environment as well as the social environment, but also looking at educators, making sure that they had adequate training, looking at, I mean, some of the things that we talked about in the third grade reading, like some of the programs that are policies that are implemented through the parent university, some of that parent education or parent engagement pieces, and helping make sure that they understand the importance of students. Anything, I mean, we talked about transportation, that's mentioned in there, but some of those type of legislative motivating pieces versus taking away much needed resources that these families need or these children need. Mhm.
Then I guess I can call it all in.
There's an amendment offered that needs to be considered. Michelle offered an
I
amendment.
think I did that. I did that.
Oh, they
Oh, you did?
Oh, you already voted on it? Okay.
Well,
We accepted it.
they accepted it.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Seconded.
To say that they should stop the practice, they should cease the practice of the HHS.
So with that, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, same?
Yay.
Well, thank you all, that's,
Haven't got through it?
that's good, thank you very much.
I think Cassandra's lost her job to you, Kathleen, because that was a lot in one
Cassandra.
session here.
Cassandra has it back as soon as she gets it.
We're at consent agenda. Can I have a motion, please?
I don't know, if you were going to say anything
Lost
about the
control.
feds, Marty.
The feds are
Were
still,
you going to say anything about the federal legislation?
Congress is still considering the
Yeah.
reauthorization. It may be any week, it may be any month. Right, they're still talking about the
Yeah.
reauthorization of No Child Left Behind, so.
We're watching it. We'll,
We yesterday, I participated in the meeting of the NASB Government Affairs Committee, and they said that they're still on track for the Senate to start, the Senate committee to start their hearings on the week of June 22nd, provided some emergency doesn't arise on the Senate calendar. But they expect to have a couple of weeks of hearings. And, not hearings, but discussion on the floor, and they expect to have a lot of amendments, both Democratic and Republican. So that's a big step forward, and they're hoping that they will get it done by July 4th break. That would be a big step forward. The House, which stopped their vote on it several months ago when some Republicans said they couldn't support it, the chairman, Klein, and the ranking member, Scott, are working together, especially the chairman, to try to get those Republicans to support the bill, or maybe a slightly different version of it. But they haven't got them yet. So they're still working on trying to line up the votes and take it to the floor of the House, and that's very iffy at this point. But the Senate thinks they're going to move the week of the 22nd. And yesterday, we should have all gotten this report from NASB, Federal Education News Update, and it talks about not only those bills, not only ESEA, but early learning, which they think might be included in ESEA. And they spent a lot of time on student privacy. There was a lot of action on that front, but FERPA, and modifying FERPA. So they include a link to a chart. You can have several different bills you can compare and see what they are. That was what I learned yesterday.
we'll keep you updated daily as we see these changes. But thanks, Kath, for that update. Yes, ma'am.
While we're talking about NASB, I want to thank Marilyn for completing the 3 applications of the 3 nominees that we submitted to the NASB Association. So thank you very much. I hope we win all 3 of them.
You're welcome.
She's great. Don't take her for granted.
No,
Hurts that is.
awesome.
Okay, consent agenda. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Supported by Lupe, supported by John. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, same. Comments by state board members? Okay.
Well, I
Yes.
wanted, and this is, I mentioned a little bit about this when the CTE discussion was going on, and I've talked to, I've been having some conversation. I'm on the Ed Committee of the Autism Alliance, which I was just asked to participate in, and I accepted. And so one of the concerns that they have is there's been some modifications made in the guidelines for career tech. Because it used to be, there was a lot of incidences where if you had a disability or that you were told you're not allowed, many districts said you're not allowed. And there was some guidance in the MDE manual that said that was okay. If they, you had to accommodate them under ADA, but you didn't necessarily have to modify the program. And so the change is now that you can modify the program. For instance, let's say your kid can't maybe complete everything to get a certificate to be, I don't know, a cosmetologist, but maybe they can learn to shampoo hair and clean the floor. And that might be good training for somebody, that might be their maximum potential. So that would be a modification of the program. They might not get the cosmetology certification, but they would have good job skills. That's the difference. It used to be my understanding, that schools could say, no, we're not going to modify. You can't get the certification, you're not going to be in the program. So this has been a change, and a real positive change, and but it seems that, for instance, me as a parent of a son who just graduated would have highly benefited from this, from my son. And the thought of it gets me really upset, so I have to take a deep breath. But I was not made, it wasn't, the policy was different until it was February, and it's too late for him. And if parents don't know about this, and this isn't widely disseminated, a lot of kids aren't going to know about this. So I'm asking that the department send out notification. I talked to Patty Cantu, who's wonderful about it, and to work on some way to get the word out so that other kids can take advantage of of these types of programs.
I'll ask Marty and Patty to take care of that, and we'll report the mid-month.
Okay.
So the old policy was bad, or the current policy is better? meaning
The
it
current
allows
policy
those job
is
skills.
much
So-
better,
So that's
and-
good, and we just need to make sure everybody kind of
Right.
operates, animating that policy, right?
Right, because a lot of.
There's always a lot of confusion,
Right.
or people sometimes don't always animate actually what the policy is and rely
Right.
on old guidance. or
Yeah,
whatever.
exactly. And there have been some efforts being made. I know there's a conference coming up where there's going to be some training, but we're asking that actually, I think if parents know about it,
Yeah.
they will be advocating.
Why don't we
for it.
also ask,
Yeah.
We
Yeah, we're
usually
kinda
engage
crazy.
at Alliance anyway, but maybe
Yeah.
specifically Sandy from PTA also to
Right.
try to help us get out, because it would be a shame that people don't know this opportunity exists now.
Right, thank you.
Thank you,
How's
Michelle.
the Lieutenant Governor behaving?
I don't know, I'm going to see him we're going to Benton Harbor next week.
Keep him in line.
He's done with your old school now. He ran right through that program.
Really? Oh, yeah, that's right, I
Yeah.
saw.
Kennedy
I should put out
School
a
at-
press release, right?
Yeah.
20 years ago, I got a master's from Harvard.
Yeah.
This is news.
Right. Yes, sir.
I hope you'll indulge me for a couple minutes while I just share. This past week, I went to 3 graduations.
Whoa.
I was the graduation speaker at St. Paul's Lutheran School in Royal Oak. And for one brief moment, I spoke as member of the State Board of Education to thank them because by sending their children to a private school, they had saved the state about $10,000 per student, which we can spread around all the other students in Michigan. So then I went to, Saturday I went to the graduation of Jalen Rose High School, their first graduating class. One of the speakers was Isaiah Thomas, and two former Detroit mayors were on the dais. So naturally, I sat way back in the back seats there. But what a tremendous job they have done with encouraging investment in Detroit students. And that's part of the promise of charter schools, is that not only do you put in public money, but you encourage those who support a vision of education to contribute private dollars. So I think I want to state in this meeting, congratulations to them on their first graduating class, and thank you to all of you who have supported this vision of education in the city of Detroit. And then the third graduation I went to was Warren Fitzgerald High School, possibly the most diverse high school in Michigan. 16 languages are spoken in that high school. Tremendous range of kids from all over, one of whom including my niece, who was born in China and adopted by my daughter. But I was so impressed with the dignity, the values expressed throughout the ceremonies, the very appropriate channels for enthusiasm for the parents to congratulate the students, and just a tremendous job. I was talking to one of the board members afterwards, and he said it's taken us about 5 years to get to this point. And that's a reminder that positive change is possible, even in these diverse conditions, even in a blue-collar suburb like Warren, facing all kinds of demographic change. It's great to see that. My niece attended Warren as under school of choice. She lives in Ferndale, and so attended by that choice. And it's wonderful that children in Michigan have choices among private, charter, and various public schools to attend. Thank you.
Thank you. They have a great superintendent, too. She's excellent, and I think
I chatted with her a little bit there. Yeah, Von Swedenberg or something like that. Yeah.
Thank you. We're good? Okay, this is where I want to, first of all, again, I'll have the chance on the 25th to thank the board, and we'll say more there. But I want to bring Brian up here a minute, because just before I hit the gavel here, I need to bring Brian up here for a second.
Well, before you hit the gavel, I have something to.
Oh, I'm sorry. Good.
But
Wait.
go ahead.
Sit down, Brian. The heck with it. That's the last thing.
That's
Now,
the
Brian's
last
will be.
thing. His is the last thing?
Yes.
Okay. All right, well, this will be our last meeting with you, and I'm feeling sentimental. But I personally, and I know all the board will join me. The last 2 years as a state board member has been exceptional. I thought I knew it all. I thought I had acquired a lot of information and had an extended educational family in the 36 and a half years that I worked in schools and was a principal, everything else. But you and the staff have truly impacted me as an individual and also as an educator. So I want to personally thank you for being such a fantastic role model for me. I hope when I grow up I can emulate some of your traits because they have been exceptional. And I have written some of those qualifications that I truly feel are so strong, so potent in you as a person, such as you're kid-oriented, with quotes, you're sentimental, you're a gentleman, you're a risk taker. This job as a whole is risk taking. You're innovative. There were testimonies here today in the reports. You're a true educator. You're ambitious. You're optimistic. I think that's one that Lupe has to learn strongly from you. I have to be optimistic
I've
all
learned
the
that from
time.
you.
You're confident. You're hopeful, always hopeful that the next day, the next minute is going to be better than the last one. You're very complimentary, and that is such a strong attribute that all of us can learn from. We have to thank and compliment each other. That's what keeps us going. You're very attentive. You're attentive to individuals and attentive to business as it was happening. You're very engaging, very engaging. Everywhere you go, that I've been there you're like a hive. All the bees are right there, wanting to take pictures with you, and because you're very engaging. You make people feel their worth. You're inclusive. You're very warm-spirited. Regardless what anybody did, you were focused. And you were warm-spirited as you took care of business. You were very collaborative. You were compassionate. You were funny, and you were witty. You were very family-oriented, and I love the picture that you used throughout Twitter and all of that with your grandchildren. That's commendable. You're very intelligent. You're well-informed. You're a great leader. You're loyal. You're very loyal to us as a board, loyal to the staff, loyal to your family, loyal to your colleagues, loyal to the legislature, whether they agreed with you or not, loyal to the governor. You always said something positive. You were loyal. You're forgiving, regardless what people say, do. And we had some testimonies here that, or in messages that were sent that I would say, what's this about? This is just not acceptable. And you were forgiving of all those people. You're very appreciative of everything that we do as a board, that the staff does, that the people do in this state, the legislature, the governor, everybody. You're appreciative. And you have, like I started at the beginning, have been truly a positive role model. And so you should be very, very proud of all the years that you have served as an educator, because you have touched thousands of people, probably all over the world. There's people all over the world that you have touched. And so as the last board meeting, I don't say goodbye. Now you're my friend, and I think all the board's friend, and so, we will see each other. But this will be our last board meeting together, so this is historical. This is historical. And I want everybody to please stand, and let's give a strong standing ovation to our superintendent.
That was a very nice way to end.
Yes.
Oh, boy.
I didn't cry.
Well, that's
I
very
feel like an
appreciated.
honorary.
I love this woman. We were in the Ed Alliance together. Well, I won't say what we,
Yeah.
I can't talk about all that. But we were-
If you made an acronym out of all those words, it spells supercalifragilistic.
It's very clever, and I appreciate it, although honestly, I'm not just saying this, I mean, I've learned so much from each of you. recently with you. A couple of those you mentioned, honestly, you haven't learned from me, I've learned from you, so.
Thank you.
Very much appreciate it. What I wanted to do was end, I'm chair, so I can end this. I wanted to bring Brian up. I knew it was a good choice, but the more I've interacted with him the last few weeks and watched him at this retirement, we're really in good shape. And I say we because I'm still a citizen of Michigan.
Absolutely.
I care very much about this department. I was a little worried what the board may do, so I can't thank you enough for picking someone with a background like this who's just exceptional. So I have a few gifts for him.
Under your desk.
One is an Excedrin extra strength. Also,
I don't know what he's telling me.
energy.
For
On a serious note, we want to right away get you the.
All right.
And then, this is the damn inbox that you're going to have.
Oh, wait, no, it's gotta be empty when you give it to me. No, it's gotta be empty.
Your technical waiver.
Yeah. We checked off some things, but we have some big
No,
things.
that's gotta be emptied.
And I think you're going to do a great job, Brian. Really appreciate it. I love it. Thank you. And what I want to do to just end the meeting with Brian here for a minute is just.
Oh, he's gonna.
Merch gave me these. I want to take this and just.
Now I have to pick it up, right?
Thank you all. We're adjourned.
You can have it.
You get to keep it.
No, wait a minute.
But you can live by and so become yourself.